This is Brian, ScreenFiles.com and Review. What I'm looking at today is 1996's Hellraiser Bloodline. And this is directed by Alan Smithee. And whenever you see a movie directed by Alan Smithee, you know that it's a pseudonym. It's a name directors use when they want to disavow ever having directed something. Let's say they're directing a movie and they were forced to make lots of compromises by the producers or the studio. And this angered them intensely. But at the same time, they weren't fired, and maybe because of contractual obligations, they weren't able to lead the project. When that type of thing happens, a director will sometimes disavow any knowledge of the project, to paraphrase Mission Impossible, and have it in credits as if directed by Alan Smithee, who, as I said, is not a real person. Though, based on my researches, Hellraiser Bloodline was directed by Kevin Yeager, who is a special effects artist. And I really enjoy this movie. And while I obviously wasn't privy to what was going on behind the scenes, I wonder what a Kevin Yeager Hellraiser Bloodline would actually look like, because this is a pretty decent movie. It does what I want Hellraiser movies to do, which is to say, it expands upon the lore. It gives us more information into the lament configuration and the Cenobites. It broadens the Hellraiser mythos. That's what I enjoy seeing. By way of illustration, Clive Barker's Hellraiser opened the door just a crack. It was blown wide open with Hellraiser 2. Opened a little more with Hellraiser 3, Hell on Earth. And Hellraiser Bloodline continues in that trend. It is a generally enjoyable movie. As I said, because it expands the universe. It revolves around the creator of the lament configuration, a toy maker named Le Marchand. And the movie takes place in different time periods. The movie actually starts in the future, though, with an ancestor of Le Marchand, who is figuring out how to destroy the Cenobites once and for all. And his plot is interrupted by security forces. Think of it kind of Aliens-ish. In any case, they interrupt him and he's telling his story to one of the officers who's questioning him. And he goes back to France, where essentially the story starts. And he was a toy maker who's building the lament configuration. It's just a box to him, which does very little, and it's kind of funny when he actually shows it to his wife. And she's so underwhelmed by how little it actually does. And so he doesn't know that it's being made by this Marquis de Sade type figure who's trying to raise a demon, and raise a demon he does. I believe her name is Angenique. And though eventually the toy maker is killed, though not before he's had a child. And the children of the toy maker throughout time seem to be strangely focused on finding ways to stop the Cenobites. It's a fascinating concept, though the notion that blood somehow holds memory is dumb. It's a stupid idea, frankly. But it's done in such a way that you roll with it. Because let's be honest, the whole notion of the Cenobites is stupid when you really give it any kind of thought. So, in that context, the idea of blood that holds racial memories is hardly the most strange thing you're going to encounter in this movie. So, it works in context. And as I was saying earlier about expanding the Hellraiser mythos, Angenique is a princess of hell, I assume. And once again, I don't think Hellraiser is talking about literal hell. It's the dimension that these beings exist in. It is a hell. It is not the hell. And there perhaps is no the hell in these movies. Or if there is, it's a parallel dimension. It's somewhere else. Just as awful, just different. In any case, Angelique appears to be a competitor almost of Hell's High Priest, who is Pinhead. And that's really interesting. And her motivation for going after the Toymaker generation after generation is simply to free herself so that the Lament configuration, the cube, is no longer a threat to her, though Pinhead catches wind of her plans. And so he takes over, essentially. Interesting stuff. It is, as I said, a really good movie. One of the better Hellraiser films. And depending on my mood, it's either slightly less good than Hellraiser 2 Hellbound, or slightly better. As I said, it depends on how I feel at any given moment. The idea that each of the Lemaitre ancestors look exactly like the original man is, once again, ludicrous. But as I also said, there's tons of ludicrous shit going on in this movie. That is the least of its offenses. And besides, it is unlikely, it is not impossible, in the sense that genes can become dominant at any individual point. It's not likely, but it's not impossible either. And besides, having, his last name is Ramsey, I believe, play each generation of Lemaitre works from a visual sense, which is to say, you immediately know who he is. And so you're not trying to figure out why he's doing what he's doing. You know that it's literally in his blood to do what he's doing. And so what he is doing is that he keeps inventing ways, sometimes almost without his knowledge, to trap the Cenobites. So Angelique, in more or less the present day, minus or subtract a decade or three, tracks him down again and tries to get him to continue his experiment so that she can be free. This is an interesting movie. It's fun. It's probably one of the better depictions of Pinhead as well. And Hellraiser Bloodline was written by Peter Atkins, the same person who co-wrote Hellraiser 2, Hellbound. And he has a way with these characters. He knows them, and he writes really easily. Well, I should say, sounds like at least. He writes really easy for them. And this movie just flows. Is it perfect? Of course it isn't. It's a Hellraiser movie. None of them are. Though, if I were to say it had any real problems, they oddly enough come down to its production design. Now I know space stations, as they exist in most movies, don't exist in reality. They're not these sanitary open spaces filled with machinery, typically. Though they are filled with machinery, though they're not very open at all. There's typically not a lot of room to move around, and they're often very cluttered with stuff of an electronic nature. So I get that movies typically will not depict space stations accurately. Though the way they're depicted in Hellraiser 4, Bloodline, is really irritating in the sense that it's very junky looking. And there is no way on Earth a space station would look like that. Reason being, as I implied earlier, there's way too many machines on there, and they need to be kept clean. Just machines work better if they're in a clean environment. Take your computer, for instance. Stick it in a place that's dirty, and it has to pull in dirty air. Your computer is not long for the world, trust me. And the same thing likely would apply to a space station. These are artistic decisions, but they're artistic decisions with a purpose. And the movie was let down by the way the production was designed for the space station, which is somewhat ironic because the production design for every other aspect of the movie was pretty good. It's a well done, well shot, attractive movie. And what I also like quite a bit is that compared to the other 3 prior movies, it's shot a lot sharper, which is to say, images pop, colors pop. It's not a very muted color palette, and that works well. Though unlike those other movies, as I said, the focus is sharp. It's not soft at all. It just looks very real for the most part. And that's very welcome because of the first Hellraiser movies, the first 4, this is probably the best looking of all of them. And so, if you have not seen Hellraiser Bloodline, don't listen to the critics. Actually watch it yourself. If you like horror, you'll probably have a good time. This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com in review. If you agree, disagree, let me know down below. And as usual, consider a like or a follow. And next week, look for trailer reactions to Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities, appearing on Netflix, as well as Hellraiser, rebooted via Hulu. Peace.